The boardroom fell silent the moment Victoria stepped through the glass doors, clutching a thick financial report against her chest. She had been with the company for less than a month, yet nearly everyone in the room already believed they knew exactly why she had been hired. Her curvy figure, gentle smile, and quiet personality made her an easy target for whispered assumptions. One executive leaned toward another and murmured, "Someone must have pulled strings." A few restrained laughs rippled around the polished conference table. Another director casually pushed her report away from the center, as though it didn't deserve to sit beside the proposals that would shape the company's future. Victoria noticed every glance. Without saying a word, she straightened the stack of papers, thanked the assistant who had prepared the meeting, and quietly took the only empty seat left at the far end of the table. The crime lord sat at the head of the room, expression unreadable. He neither interrupted nor acknowledged the growing ridicule. One executive flipped through Victoria's report for less than 10 seconds before dropping it onto the table with a dismissive smile. Completely unrealistic. Another executive nodded. "We don't have time to entertain fantasy." The decision was made before Victoria had spoken a single word. She reached for her report, ready to gather her papers and leave with what little dignity she had left. Before her fingertips touched the folder, a calm voice broke the silence. "Leave it." Nobody moved. The crime lord slowly rose from his chair. His eyes settled on the executive who had laughed first. Then he spoke only one more sentence. "She will finish her presentation." No one in the room dared to argue. Victoria looked up in stunned silence. She had no idea why the most feared man in the company had just stopped her from walking away. Neither did anyone else. Victoria's first morning at Blackstone Holdings began long before sunrise. She arrived nearly an hour before everyone else, carrying a worn leather notebook, a laptop that had seen better days, and a neatly packed lunch she had prepared herself. The 27-story headquarters was almost silent. Cleaning staff moved quietly through the marble lobby, while security guards exchanged sleepy greetings at the front desk. Victoria smiled politely to everyone she passed. No one paid much attention to her. That changed once the rest of the employees arrived. Within minutes, whispers began following her through the hallways. "That's the new analyst. I thought she'd be different. She doesn't exactly look like someone handling billion-dollar investments." Victoria had heard comments like those before. Some people tried to lower their voices. Others made no effort at all. She simply kept walking. When she reached the finance department, several analysts were already gathered around the coffee machine, discussing the company's biggest strategic meeting of the year. Every department had spent months preparing proposals. Only one plan would receive funding. Winning that presentation could reshape the entire company's future. As Victoria approached, the conversation paused for only a second. One analyst glanced at the visitor badge, still hanging around her neck. "So you're the new hire." Victoria nodded politely. "Yes, my name is Victoria." Another employee looked her up and down before forcing a smile. "Welcome." The word sounded friendly. The expression behind it did not. A few minutes later, Victoria found her desk, tucked into the far corner of the open office. Unlike everyone else's workspace, hers contained no family photos, awards, or decorations. Only an empty monitor, a keyboard, and a company handbook waiting for its newest employee. She sat down quietly and opened her notebook. Before she could even log into her computer, someone placed a thick stack of market reports beside her. "If you're new," a senior analyst said casually, "you can organize these." Victoria looked at the papers. "They're already organized." The analyst shrugged. "Then organize them again." Laughter spread across nearby desks. Victoria didn't argue. She simply began checking every page one by one. Less than 15 minutes later, she discovered several quarterly figures had been filed under the wrong regional division. She corrected the mistake, attached a short note, explaining the discrepancy, and returned the reports without mentioning who had made the error. The senior analyst barely looked at them. Thanks. No apology followed. Throughout the morning, similar moments repeated themselves. Whenever someone needed routine calculations, they handed them to Victoria. Whenever coffee needed refilling before a meeting, someone naturally looked in her direction. Whenever conversations turned to major investment decisions, nobody asked for her opinion. She accepted every task with the same calm expression. Not because she lacked confidence, because she had learned long ago that arguing with people's first impressions rarely changed them. Results did. By late afternoon, an email appeared in every executive's inbox. The crime lord had requested fresh financial projections before the upcoming strategy meeting. Every analyst was invited to submit recommendations. Most employees rolled their eyes. It's just a formality. The executives already know which proposal they'll approve. No one's reading ours. Victoria read the email twice. Then she quietly opened a blank spreadsheet. Outside, the office lights gradually dimmed as employees packed their bags and headed home. One by one, the floor emptied. The laughter disappeared. The conversations faded into silence. Only one desk remained illuminated near the corner window. Victoria was still there. Numbers filled her screen. Charts slowly replaced empty cells. She compared years of market behavior, supplier contracts, commodity trends, shipping costs, currency exposure, and customer demand. Every figure had to support the next. Every conclusion had to survive scrutiny. Hours passed unnoticed. When the digital clock finally displayed 10:47 p.m., she leaned back for the first time all day and quietly closed her eyes. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't trying to prove the people in the office wrong. She simply refused to submit work she couldn't defend. Across the darkened city skyline, the lights of the executive floor were still on. Victoria gathered her notes, unaware that somewhere inside the building, someone else was still working, long after everyone had gone home. The annual strategy meeting was unlike any other gathering inside Blackstone Holdings. Only senior executives, division directors, and the company's most trusted financial advisors were invited to attend. Every proposal presented that morning carried consequences worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Victoria paused outside the conference room for a brief moment before taking a slow breath. She adjusted the folder in her hands and reminded herself of the promise she had made years ago. Never compromise the truth simply because the room refuses to hear it. When the doors opened, dozens of conversations quietly faded. Some executives recognized her immediately. Others frowned, trying to remember who she was. The new analyst? I didn't know junior staff were attending. Maybe she's here to observe. Victoria heard every word, but continued toward the only empty chair, waiting at the far end of the polished table. Nobody welcomed her. Nobody introduced her. Several executives exchanged amused smiles before returning to their conversations as though she were invisible. At precisely 9 o'clock, the crime lord entered. The room rose instantly. Without greeting anyone, he took his seat at the head of the table and signaled for the meeting to begin. Department heads presented one proposal after another. Expansion plans, acquisition opportunities, international partnerships. Every speaker sounded confident. Every forecast promised impressive returns. The crime lord listened in complete silence. He asked only a handful of short questions. Each answer was followed by another long stretch of silence that made even experienced executives visibly uncomfortable. Nearly 2 hours passed before the chief financial officer glanced at the agenda. One final submission remains. He looked toward Victoria. Our newest analyst prepared an alternative market strategy. A quiet laugh escaped from someone near the opposite end of the table. Another executive leaned back in his chair. I think we're running behind schedule. Several people nodded. "No offense," another director said while smiling politely toward Victoria. "But perhaps we should review junior proposals another day." Before anyone responded, a vice president reached across the table and picked up Victoria's report. He flipped through several pages with obvious impatience. Color-coded charts, risk projections, cash flow scenarios, supplier analyses. After less than 10 seconds, he closed the report. "This assumes the commodity market will reverse within months." He shook his head. "That's not going to happen." Without reading another page, he slid the report toward the middle of the table. "I don't think we need to spend valuable meeting time discussing this." Several executives quietly agreed. One of them chuckled. "I appreciate the enthusiasm." Another smiled. "It's a solid academic exercise." Someone else added, "But this isn't a university classroom." A few restrained laughs spread around the room. Victoria felt dozens of eyes settling on her. She had experienced moments like this before. The familiar tightening in her chest returned. For a brief second, she questioned whether coming to the meeting had been a mistake. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps nobody wanted to hear what she had spent weeks preparing. Slowly, she reached toward the report. "If there's no interest," she said softly, "I'll withdraw my presentation." Her fingers brushed the edge of the folder. Then a calm voice echoed through the room. "Leave it." The room froze. Victoria stopped moving. The executive, still holding the report, looked toward the head of the table. The crime lord remained seated. His expression revealed nothing. No anger. No sympathy. No emotion at all. He looked first at the report, then at the executives who had already dismissed it. Finally, his eyes rested on Victoria. "Take your seat." She hesitated. For one uncertain moment, she wasn't sure he was speaking to her. Then he repeated the instruction. "You're not leaving." Complete silence settled over the boardroom. Several executives exchanged confused glances. The vice president cleared his throat. "Sir, with respect, we've already reviewed enough material to make today's decision." The crime lord turned toward him. "Have you?" The question was quiet. Almost conversational, yet nobody answered. He slowly folded his hands on the table. "You rejected a proposal." Another long pause followed. "You did not evaluate it." No one spoke. The executive who had laughed earlier attempted a careful smile. "Sir, we simply believed it was unrealistic." The crime lord never looked away. "I didn't ask what you believed." His voice remained calm. "I asked whether you evaluated it." Again, silence. For the first time that morning, several directors lowered their eyes. The confidence that had filled the room only moments earlier had begun to disappear. The crime lord nodded once. Then he turned toward Victoria. "You have the floor." Every executive in the room looked at her. Only seconds earlier, they had expected her to leave in humiliation. Now, the most feared man in the company was waiting for her to speak. Victoria slowly stood, her hands tightening around the presentation folder. She walked toward the screen at the front of the room. As she connected her laptop, no one interrupted. No one whispered. No one laughed. She looked once around the room before opening the first slide. "This projection," she began quietly, "is based on one assumption almost everyone in this industry believes is impossible." The next sentence would change the future of Blackstone Holdings. The first slide contained no dramatic headlines, no bold promises, no optimistic projections designed to impress investors. Instead, Victoria displayed a single chart showing commodity prices over the previous 12 years. The room remained quiet. She clicked to the next slide. "For the past decade," she began calmly, "our competitors have built their expansion plans on one assumption." She paused. "That raw material prices will remain stable." Several executives nodded. It was a reasonable assumption. Most industry analysts shared the same outlook. Victoria changed to another chart. This assumption is no longer supported by the data. Someone sighed impatiently. Another executive folded his arms. Victoria continued as though she hadn't noticed. She explained how shipping routes had become increasingly vulnerable to geopolitical tensions. She demonstrated how several major suppliers had quietly reduced production months earlier. She pointed to insurance costs that had risen faster than commodity prices themselves. Individually, each signal appeared insignificant. Together, they revealed a pattern. If these trends continue, she said, the market won't experience gradual inflation. She looked around the room. It will experience a supply shock. One director shook his head. You're predicting a crisis. Victoria nodded. Yes, within 6 months. Much sooner. The room erupted into discussion. Impossible. Our consultants disagree. We've invested millions into these forecasts. Another executive leaned forward. Every major bank expects stable growth. Victoria answered without raising her voice. Large institutions are often correct. She clicked to another slide. But they are sometimes late. Silence returned. For nearly 40 minutes, she answered every question, every challenge, every criticism. Whenever someone questioned her numbers, she immediately opened another document. Whenever someone challenged her assumptions, she produced another source. She never guessed. She never exaggerated. Everything she said could be traced back to evidence. Even so, doubt remained visible across the room. When she finally finished, no one applauded. The chief financial officer spoke first. Your analysis is impressive. He hesitated, but acting on it would require delaying our expansion project. Another executive quickly added, and delaying could cost us enormous opportunities if your prediction is wrong. Several directors agreed. The room slowly shifted back toward its original position. Reject the proposal. Continue with the existing strategy. The crime lord remained silent until every opinion had been heard. Finally, he stood. Every conversation stopped immediately. He walked toward the large screen where Victoria's final chart still remained. Without looking at anyone else, he asked only one question. If she's correct. His eyes moved across the room. What do we lose by ignoring this? Nobody answered. After several long seconds, the chief financial officer finally spoke. If she's correct, he stopped. The losses could be catastrophic. The crime lord nodded. And if she's wrong, another executive answered. We postpone the expansion by a few weeks. Again, silence. The comparison suddenly sounded very different. The crime lord returned to his seat. We're suspending the expansion. Several executives stared at him in disbelief. He continued. Conduct a full stress test using Victoria's model. No one argued. No one dared. The meeting ended with more questions than answers. As executives quietly left the room, many still believed the decision was unnecessary. Some blamed Victoria for delaying months of preparation. Others privately wondered why the crime lord had trusted someone so inexperienced. Victoria packed her laptop in silence. She expected criticism. She did not expect the crime lord to stop beside her as everyone else walked out. He looked at the closed presentation folder resting in her hands. Good work. Only 2 words. Then he walked away. It was the first time anyone in the company had acknowledged her abilities. 2 weeks later, international headlines exploded across every financial news network. A sudden disruption in global supply chains triggered exactly the market shock Victoria had predicted. Commodity prices surged. Shipping costs skyrocketed. Several competitors who had rushed into expansion projects immediately announced emergency losses worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Inside Blackstone Holdings, complete silence spread through the executive floor. Every number on Victoria's presentation had unfolded almost exactly as she had warned. For the first time, People stopped talking about her appearance. They started talking about her analysis. The atmosphere inside Blackstone Holdings changed almost overnight. Only 2 weeks earlier, many employees had quietly questioned why Victoria had been hired. Now those same people stopped talking whenever she walked past. Some offered polite smiles. Others suddenly asked for her opinion during meetings. A few even congratulated her on predicting the market disruption before anyone else. Victoria thanked them with the same quiet humility she had shown from her first day. She accepted neither the praise nor the sudden attention as proof that she belonged. She had learned long ago how quickly people's opinions could change. Respect, earned overnight, could disappear just as fast. Meanwhile, the executive team worked around the clock, adjusting the company's investment strategy. Because Blackstone Holdings had delayed its expansion, the company avoided losses that devastated several competitors. Financial news channels called it remarkable timing. Industry analysts described it as disciplined leadership. Inside the company, however, only a handful of people knew that one junior analyst had first identified the danger. Even then, few understood who Victoria really was. Late one evening, after most employees had gone home, the crime lord entered his private office, carrying a slim black folder. He placed it on his desk without opening it immediately. For several moments, he simply looked through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city below. Finally, he opened the file. The first page contained Victoria's employment application. Behind it were documents that no one inside the company had ever seen: performance reviews, professional certifications, archived investment reports, letters from former colleagues, newspaper articles, legal filings. Each document described fragments of a career that had ended far too suddenly. 5 years earlier, Victoria had been considered one of the brightest young financial analysts at an internationally respected investment firm. Her forecasts had consistently outperformed senior colleagues. Clients requested to work with her. Partners trusted her judgment. Many believed she would eventually become one of the youngest portfolio directors in the company's history. Then, everything collapsed. An internal financial investigation accused her of approving inaccurate reporting tied to a multi-billion-dollar investment fund. The allegations spread quickly. Industry publications repeated the story before any formal investigation had concluded. Within days, she lost her position. Within weeks, every interview she attended ended the same way. "We've decided to move forward with another candidate." No explanation, no second chance. Her reputation disappeared long before anyone examined the evidence. The crime lord slowly turned another page. Unlike the public reports, this section had never appeared in the media. It contained interview transcripts, internal emails, private correspondence obtained through independent investigators. One message immediately drew his attention. Victoria had refused to alter projected loss figures before they were presented to investors. She warned senior management that changing the numbers would mislead shareholders. Hours later, someone else modified the report. When regulators began asking questions months afterward, responsibility somehow landed on the youngest analyst in the department. Victoria never admitted to something she hadn't done. She never accepted a settlement requiring a confession. She chose unemployment over dishonesty. The decision cost her everything. The crime lord quietly closed the folder. Nothing inside surprised him. He had already reviewed every page before offering her a position at Blackstone Holdings. He had never hired Victoria out of sympathy. He hired her because integrity was becoming rarer than intelligence. Exceptional analysts could be recruited almost anywhere. People willing to sacrifice their careers rather than falsify financial data were almost impossible to find. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. His chief of security entered the office. "We found another witness." The crime lord looked up. "The former compliance manager?" The man nodded. He's finally willing to testify. Another file was placed on the desk. New evidence. New financial records. New names. The investigation that had destroyed Victoria's career was no longer a forgotten corporate scandal. Someone had carefully constructed it. Someone had benefited from her downfall. The crime lord opened the new file. One familiar signature appeared again and again across multiple documents. A senior executive who had quietly resigned from the investment firm years earlier. He was no longer hiding. He had recently resurfaced as chief negotiator for a rival corporation, preparing to compete directly against Blackstone Holdings for one of the largest contracts in the industry. The crime lord closed the folder. For the first time that evening, a faint smile crossed his face. Interesting. His chief of security waited. What are your instructions? The answer came without hesitation. Don't contact him. The room fell silent. We'll let him come to us. Miles away, unaware that his past was about to catch up with him, the man finalized preparations for the upcoming contract negotiations. He believed Victoria's name had been buried years ago. He had no idea that the woman he once destroyed was now working beside the only man powerful enough to expose the truth. 3 weeks later, Blackstone Holdings hosted the final negotiations for the largest corporate acquisition in its history. Representatives from several international firms gathered inside the executive boardroom. Among them was the lead negotiator from Sterling Capital. The moment Victoria saw him, the color drained from her face. Daniel Mercer. 5 years had passed. He looked older, more confident, more successful. Yet she recognized him immediately. He was the executive who had supervised her during the final months of her previous career. He was also the man who had signed the financial reports that eventually destroyed her reputation. Daniel walked into the room with the confidence of someone who believed the past had been buried forever. Then his eyes met Victoria's. For a fraction of a second, surprise crossed his face. It disappeared almost instantly. So, he smiled politely. I didn't expect to see you here. Victoria remained calm. Neither did I. Several executives looked between them, sensing an uncomfortable history neither side explained. Daniel laughed softly. I'm glad you found work again. His words sounded kind. His tone did not. I heard things became difficult after your last position. Victoria said nothing. She had spent years defending herself. Today, she no longer felt the need. The crime lord entered moments later. Everyone stood. The negotiations began. For nearly an hour, both companies presented financial projections, investment strategies, and long-term growth plans. Daniel spoke with polished confidence. Years of experience made him an impressive presenter. Several board members appeared convinced. When questions ended, Daniel gathered his documents. I believe we've demonstrated why Sterling Capital is the stronger partner. Before anyone replied, his eyes drifted toward Victoria again. I only hope this company exercises better judgment than your previous employer. The room became noticeably quieter. Victoria lowered her eyes but remained silent. Daniel interpreted her silence as defeat. He continued. Talent is important. He smiled. But trust matters even more. The words hung in the air. Several executives shifted uneasily. They remembered the rumors surrounding Victoria before she joined Blackstone. Daniel clearly expected those rumors to work in his favor once again. Instead, the crime lord slowly closed his notebook. Mr. Mercer. Daniel turned. Yes? You mentioned trust. I did. The crime lord nodded. I agree. He pressed a small button on the conference table. The large presentation screen behind him came to life. It did not display financial projections. It displayed archived internal emails. The first message carried Daniel's name. His smile faded. Another document appeared. Then another. Board members leaned forward. The room grew silent. Each file reconstructed the same sequence of events from 5 years earlier. Original financial reports. Edited versions. Approval timestamps. Internal communications. Digital signatures. Every document pointed toward one conclusion. Victoria had refused to alter the numbers. Someone else had changed them afterward. That person had approved their release. That person had redirected responsibility. That person was Daniel Mercer. No, Daniel whispered. There has to be some mistake. The crime lord remained calm. There isn't. Another document appeared. This time it was testimony from the former compliance manager. Then, forensic audit results. Then, server access records. Every piece of evidence supported the next. No gaps remained. No explanation survived. Daniel looked desperately around the room. No one met his eyes. The executives who had admired his presentation only minutes earlier now sat in complete silence. Finally, Victoria spoke. Her voice was quiet. I told the truth. She wasn't speaking with anger. She wasn't asking for revenge. She was simply stating the one thing she had been unable to prove for 5 long years. The silence that followed carried more weight than any argument. Daniel slowly lowered his head. He realized there was nothing left to deny. The chairman of Sterling Capital stood first. Without saying a word, he removed Daniel's company credentials from the table. We'll conduct our own investigation. Daniel never answered. Security escorted him from the room. The door closed behind him. No one applauded. No one celebrated. For several moments, the boardroom remained completely still. Then one of Blackstone's senior directors turned toward Victoria. I owe you an apology. Another executive nodded. So do I. One after another, the people who had once dismissed her acknowledged the mistake they had made. Victoria accepted every apology with the same quiet grace she had shown on her very first day. She did not need revenge. The truth had restored something far more valuable: her name. As the meeting came to an end, the crime lord looked toward the seat where Victoria had once sat alone at the far end of the boardroom. Then he gave a simple instruction. From now on, he gestured toward the chair beside him. That seat is yours. For the first time since joining Blackstone Holdings, Victoria walked to the head of the table, not because someone had shown her kindness, but because she had earned the respect of everyone in the room. 1 year later, the boardroom looked very different. The polished conference table was the same. The towering windows still overlooked the city skyline. The executives who gathered there were many of the same people who had once questioned whether Victoria deserved to be in the room at all. But one detail had quietly changed everything. The chair at the far end of the table no longer belonged to her. It had been given to someone else. Victoria now sat beside the crime lord as Blackstone Holdings' chief strategy officer. No announcement had ever declared her the most respected voice in the company. She had earned that place one decision at a time, one forecast at a time, one honest conversation at a time. Her office walls remained almost empty. No trophies, no framed awards. Only market reports, handwritten notes, and the same worn leather notebook she had carried on her very first day. She never forgot where she had started. One morning, another newly hired analyst walked nervously into the boardroom, carrying an oversized presentation folder. The room grew unusually quiet. Several executives exchanged curious glances, just as they once had when Victoria first arrived. She noticed the young analyst hesitate beside the door. Without saying a word, Victoria stood. She walked across the room, smiled warmly, and carried the extra presentation materials to the conference table herself. Then she pulled out the empty chair beside her. "Please," she said gently, "sit here." The young analyst looked surprised. So close to the front, Victoria smiled. The best ideas deserve to be heard. Across the table, the crime lord watched the exchange without interrupting. For a brief moment, their eyes met. No words were necessary. He understood exactly why she had done it. Respect was never something a title could guarantee. It was something every leader chose to give. As the meeting began, the room felt different from the one Victoria had entered a year earlier. Not because the company had become more successful, not because profits had reached record highs, but because one person had refused to let another be judged before being heard. Sometimes the greatest investment a leader can make is not in markets or companies. It is in people whose value the rest of the world has failed to see. And sometimes, all it takes to change someone's future is one person willing to say, "She will finish her presentation."